Welcome to Voices of CX Season 8. As usual, bringing you the very best thought leaders, practitioners, and academics all in one place. Our goal is to make your job easier by providing you with the tools and inspiration that you need to lead through empathy, one new idea at a time. Welcome back to the viewers and listeners of Voices of Customer Experience podcast. We're in Season 8, and today I am joined by Leslie Short. Leslie is a brilliant woman who I had the pleasure of speaking to the other day in our pre-call for this recording. And I'm going to let her introduce herself because, there's no one better to do the job. Leslie, take it away.
Thank you, Mary. Excited to be here. So I'm Leslie Short, the owner of the Cavu Group, and I work with companies, organizations, and brands to expand beyond their current culture. And I do that through the diversity and inclusion lens. And I'm also the author of a book, Expand Beyond Your Current Culture. Clearly, that's a theme.
Well, that's great. And one of the reasons that I was excited to have you on here today was because although we've discussed culture at length on this podcast, we've never really applied the lens of diversity and inclusion to it. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, to be more clear. So having you on here to address this and understand on a deeper level how strongly this influences company culture as a whole and consequently affects the customers and the way that they perceive and interact and identify with the brand. So let's start off talking about a little bit of how you help companies. When you walk in the door, someone invites you in to share your message and your work. What's that like? And how has that increased recently?
Well, clearly it's increased. I'm going to go backwards and then come forward. Clearly it's increased in the last 18 months, or really 16 months, because when we went into the pandemic, realistically, companies and brands were dismantling their DEI efforts. Because that was money, that was extra. No one was thinking about that. It was all about pandemic. And then the murder of George Floyd happened, and it was a race in time to not only put these practices back in place, but to start hiring like there's no tomorrow. So with that said, my phone started ringing, and I kept saying, why is this important to you? And don't give me your PR spit. And once we got past that, if they could get past that, when I walk in the door or turn on a Zoom, because we know that's where we're going now, the first questions I ask is, what is your definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Because they are three different words with three different meanings. And until we break that down, as an understanding as a company, we're already lost.
Yeah. Well, so I was going to ask you, is there a right answer to that? Is there an answer that you're looking for specifically when you ask that question?
I want people to be honest. Yes. And so what happens is I'll get a lot of head nods, but I'm going, if you think diversity means black and white, especially after George's murder, then you're wrong. Diversity is gender, race, disability, sight seen and unseen, LGBTQ plus, and veterans. Now I have a thing with veterans, whether they should be underneath that, but I'm not going to fight society today. So I'm going to keep that there. So we have to start with that. Then what does equity mean for your company? What does that look like? And no one thinks of equity that way. Most people think of equity as money. So we have to break that down. And then inclusion. Inclusion is not what you think it is. It's how someone else perceives it, feels it, and can move through it. So I have to really start with vocabulary of words have meaning, which is a whole nother session that I do later on. But if we don't have that understanding, and then how it affects, how it seeps in, how it builds your company culture, if that's not important to them, which will eventually be your bottom line, then they're not the company that I want to work with.
And how do you feel about the whole idea of, better late than never? Because it's so tragic that we had to go through something so serious in order for people to start paying attention. And as tragic as that is, It has increased efforts. It has increased movements. And even though some may be a PR stunt, like you said, or just companies knowing that if they don't make these changes, then the internet is going to come after them.
Right.
But is there good to be found there? Is there something that we can use to actually build something that's sustainable long term and change the workplace as we know it?
I always believe there's good in everything. But let's be honest, this is not new. This is the problem that everyone thinks is new. We can go back to affirmative action. We can go back into, and go through the history of multicultural marketing and mosaic marketing, all the things that it was called before. What happened now is that there was a rallying cry from employees. See, before it was the employer, and then it became a legal action with the employer and legal, right? So they had to do it, and they had to do it by numbers. Now it was a rallying cry for the people that show up every day. Not only Black and brown people, but a large majority of their employees that I don't want to say everyone, because everyone's not on this yellow brick road for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's what we need to understand. So we had to build, what does that look like today? Not what it was 20 years ago, not what it was 18 months ago. But there's a glitch with that. And I don't want to answer probably a question you have too soon, but but I'm going to go into it if you don't mind. The glitch is everyone running out. Hire Black people, hire Black people, hire brown people. I need you to stop doing that. I need you to pause. Power, privilege, and pause. Because you need to pause to understand what is the importance of having this diversity, not only of color, of gender, of disabilities. And are you prepared as leadership to give equity to anyone that walks through your door, and to build inclusion for within, not belonging, because a book belongs in a bookstore. And only you as a human being can decide where you belong. That's not a job's responsibility. Their responsibility is to build a culture of equity and inclusion.
That's actually a really good point. That inclusion is something that comes from within, and we each have to work on ourselves, right? Do you believe, though, that in all of these circumstances, that this time perhaps we will see long-lasting change?
For those that are serious, that made a commitment past a Black box in Juneteenth, that made a commitment past signing on to whatever a bunch of them signed on to, because a lot of them have already said they couldn't do what they signed on to. That happened last week. A lot of people are fatigued. I heard allyship is very fatigued at the moment. Nice luxury to have. For those, and I'm working with some amazing clients, I have to say, it has not been easy. It has not been easy for them. It hasn't always been easy for me. But they are committed to, I don't like to use the word change. I like to say shift, because this is going to shift in movements. A change you think happened, boop, a shift little by little, because it's a mind shift, a thought shift, a feeling shift. Then it has to be a process, policy, and procedure shift. And that has to go from the mailroom to the boardroom. So it takes time to build all of that in. But yes, there will be, and I see shifts happening.
Now, I think that one of the most important things for us to do as leaders in organizations is to be able to very clearly lay out the value. Because lots of times what happens is that people in positions of leadership don't have the power that people on the outside think they do. That power sometimes lies with the board. It lies with shareholders, and they will lose their jobs if they don't provide some proof of profit. But the truth is, it is extremely profitable to have equity and inclusion. And definitely it's profitable to have diversity internally. So is this part of the work that you do, showing organizations how much that they miss out on when it comes to revenue if they skip this step?
You know what? I don't get a lot of those clients because they know not to come to me because they're hiring. So, because I'm going to be honest, like you're doing this performative and I don't have the bandwidth of my spirit. This comes from my spirit doing this work, comes from my mind, it comes from my knowledge. I'm not here to placate the fact that you're trying to reach a number, but I am here to, if you allow me to work with you, because there's work on both sides, to build this into the foundation for what you're building. Again, from the mailroom to the boardroom, I work with boards. I've been doing sessions with boards. And they get me involved that way, that they understand and can start to see the difference to the person who was sending emails to HR like, we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be doing this. And they made some things mandatory. And he came in mad. He came in hot. My new best friend today, because he said, as an employee, you're not trying to change us. You're trying to show us that there's ways that we can be better and stronger together. And that's understanding each other, which allowed them to work better. That what happened? They start doing more together, which meant more profit. They start to see that the attitude of employees start to change.
Yeah.
And that already is a winning bottom line.
Yeah. How often do you encounter people saying we have to change because it is our responsibility? It's the right thing to do from a moral and ethical standpoint. That there is an injustice being done and we have the power to correct it, so we will, versus the market now understands, our stakeholders understand the importance of this and they're demanding action. Do you see that contrast?
I definitely do. And I like to work with both of those. Those are the companies I want to work with. Because at the end of the day, there's the bottom line of, I understand people are important. And I need to figure out how to do that the best way I can. And everyone's at different stages. So one stage is not any less than the other. Anyone, people say to me, who's your perfect client? Anyone that's willing to do the work, that really wants to have this conversation, that wants to peel back the onion, that comes in and says, okay, what's the low-hanging fruit we can start with? And then how do we keep building this? And so it's important for both sides to come, however they get to it. Let's get here. That's what's important.
So what's some of the foundation, what's some of the building blocks, or like you said, like the low-hanging fruit that when you enter an organization, you're like, you need to start right here. It's not, from what I'm hearing from you, it's not with recruiting. It's with building a culture internally, right? So lay this out for me here.
So when they say, oh, we want to recruit, and I go, why? Well, because nope. I don't say no. I don't. Nope. And and once they get to see me, they know my face is on Zoom now. And they're like, what do we do? And I said, you haven't taken care of the people that's in-house. How are you bringing new people in when you have people leaving or unhappy within? Let's take a moment and step back. I want to see your handbook. I want to see your vision statement. I want to see your mission statement. I want to know who people report to. I want to know who's the other person that people can report to. And I mean, when something is right and something is wrong. And I start breaking that down. I want to see emails and notices of how you speak to your staff. And see, they look at me like, what's that got to do with DEI? DEI is not an add-on. And that's the thing. Most people thought it was an add-on. It's part of your culture. So I need to see how you run this to understand where we can start. And so while I may be working on doing a session with them on your personal bias, like I'm not a fan for hitting that, that video. They all serve a purpose. But Jane, don't do that to Mary. Mary, stop that with John. John, don't. Come on now. We need, before you even recognize what's wrong, you have to understand what you're bringing to the table, what's in your bag, whether you're a CEO or not. So I break that down to them. What is their added value they're giving to an employee outside of a check? And what's the added values you're looking for from employees outside of getting that check? And when we start breaking those things down and then looking through the handbook on, that's great. Everyone has a handbook. No, let me take that back. Everyone doesn't have a handbook. But
You're saying this, and I'm like, wow, we just made our handbook like 3 months ago.
a lot of people don't have a handbook. So therefore, I'm like, what's your code of conduct? I get the big eyes there. There's things that we can break down. And even in your handbook, I go, that's great. But let's be honest. You get hired, you get the handbook, you're excited you have a gig, you sign off on everything. You put that thing in a folder, because most of them are electronic now. You put it in a drawer and you don't look at that again.
It's true.
So how do we actually live what we're saying to people is part of our values? We have to bring those values to life. And that's how I start.
Is that just education, or is there something extra that comes along with it? Like, do you think that the rules are important as a form of education, or do you think that just speaking to people and training and opening their eyes to perhaps some biases that they've been conditioned to over the course of their lives, does it go a little bit further than just the talking?
Has to go further. It's education, and you have to educate yourself. It's not up to your Black and brown employees to educate you. Mm-hmm. It's not up to, and so I say that on both sides. Leaders, educate yourself, and employees, educate yourself. Stop saying the word transparency. You don't have the books. You're not getting transparency. You're asking for visibility. You know? And so it's even breaking down these terminologies. Trainings, like you train a dog, you train animals. These are sessions. You have to allow people to actually speak, to actually say to someone, hey, I don't feel that way. And someone clutch their pearls and go, well, what do you mean? And I remember someone going, I never, ever thought someone's path in this company was different from mine. And so that light bulb went off that, oh, everyone doesn't show up the same way every day. Because that's a privilege to think that everyone gets to show up the same way. And so it's education, and you have to keep, and it's repetitive. It's like being a gymnast. You don't go do a cartwheel and backflip and be Simone Biles. Woo! You may luck out one day, right? And hit that split in the air and be like,
You may also break your neck.
But if it's something you're committed to, you get up and you come back again. And that is what this work is. You may get bruised along the way, but you get up and say, it's important enough for me to get that bruise to make sure that when someone walks in here and we work together, that there is a mission and a purpose, and that people can see themselves here, that they have a valid voice within this organization. And from that valid voice will go out to your consumer. Because the moment the voice is not valued, that Yelp review, Twitter feed, and all that stuff everyone's scared of happens. That, people know how to write, and there are op-eds that are looking for these stories.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, in the current market that we're living in September 2021, everywhere I go, whether it's to the laundromat or the gas station or restaurants, there are signs saying, we are ready to hire now. Please, somebody come work for us. And it seems like there is a giant shortage of workers. Now, a lot of people, and we know that a lot of people are really quick to point the finger and blame social initiatives and benefits for people not showing up to work. But I think anyone with more than one brain cell knows that the problem lies a little bit deeper. What's your point of view on that, on this crisis?
All right. The crisis is not a crisis because I'm in the midst of working with a company to hire at this moment. Right? And so I'm seeing a lot, seeing a lot of resumes. Every time I open up that email, it's flooded. So people are looking to work. People are looking to work where they want to work. That's the difference. Years ago, You took the job, you kept your head down, you kept your mouth shut, and you took what a job gave you. Now people are going, what is your commitment to social justice? And I always say, ask that if it's the social justice company. Don't ask that to a corporation. Ask what is your commitment for community, which is part of social justice, but you have to say the words differently. Ask what are your commitments to diversity, equity, inclusion outside having a group. And so employees, that are looking for work, are looking to work in places that don't have toxic environments. I had someone say, I just came out of something. I'm not walking back into that again. You're not paging me at 9:00 at night and 10:00 at night. I'm not a doctor. I can't help you. I'm not a minister. I can't bless you. I can't, I'm not a rabbi. Like, there are people that are just like, I can't, not, why are you called? Like, there are boundaries for which we have no boundaries working in these squares, but people are saying, I want more out of the people I work with. And that's whether they're flipping a burger or creating the next rocket ship to go up. And if you aren't incentivizing, and I don't mean money always, your employees, that you are committed to their growth and to opportunities inside the company and what the work they do outside of the company for communities and things, some are just like, well, then you're not the right fit for me.
Yeah. It's interesting because pre-COVID, I wrote an article about how millennials were not going to suck it up and work for no reason. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing. I expected the kind of the pushback to be, oh, eventually they'll move to another organization. I did not predict an exodus. And simply a refusal to work or be productive in a society that's unfair. And yes, this is millennials, but it's also Gen Z. It's also the youth that's entering the market now and saying, oh, hell no. I'm not going to stand for this. These aren't my values.
Right.
And so here's the thing. I have a lot of conversations with senior leaders, and the perspective is still mostly, it's a job. It's a job. We're not supposed to like our jobs. And we are. We are supposed to like our jobs. We're allowed to have pleasure in waking up in the morning and coming into work. We're allowed to feel like we belong in an organization, and not that quote unquote we're family that a lot of companies are selling, but the feeling that, the organization that you work for truly cares about its people, about its customers, about its morals, about its ethics. And again, I'm not talking about whether or not the employee passes a drug test every 3 months. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about true morals, valuing human lives, respecting human lives, and fighting for it as a corporation. Yeah.
And it's in different ways. And so I always say you have to know where you are. So one company may do one way and be very loud about it. And someone else may be doing a whole lot and you don't know about it unless you're in or you see certain things. So you have to do your research as well to see where you fit. There's some that will do nothing. So don't apply there because you see who they are because they're telling you who they are. Now, it's important for some people to really say and listen, what is it that you're looking for? Doesn't mean we can do it all, but what is it? And there's others that have said, we can do better. Even though they were already doing things, we can do better. And we're going to make the path and make sure that Black and brown folks have an opportunity to know when jobs are available within the company, that we're not going to keep moving the goalpost. You don't have that degree, so go get that. They come back with a degree. Oh, no, this one. We're going to stop moving goalposts. it's going to have, there will be equity in where we are. Just because Bob knows John's father and grandfather, well, John may still get it, but there's going to, and we have to be prepared for this. But we're also going to hold them at task because of that.
Yeah.
And so until companies realize, and most of you have to realize, this didn't happen until 16 months ago when employees kind of rammed the door open and said, what are you doing? We will not work here if you do not do better. And this was white, black, yellow, green, purple. And I'm going to tell you something else. Now that I'm doing interviews with some executives, they will tell you quick as well. I have had careers. This is not a job. So what I do next must have meaning in this world. Out of 6 people, executives that I last night interviewed with a CEO of a company, each of them said that in front of him. I want this position because it is making a difference in lives that always don't look like mine, but I am connected to.
Yeah.
Days have changed.
Yeah, that's beautiful, actually. So when a client comes to you and says, hey, Leslie, I need to hire 10 Black people to work at my company because I have too many white people and it doesn't look good. So I want to fill these 10 spots with people of color. How do you feel about that? Because that's essentially...
Nope. I'm going to go back to that word again.
Okay, great. It was definitely the answer I was looking for. So why?
Because it's a setup. It's a setup for the employees. It's a setup for the employer because they go, okay, we have these spots filled. There's no entry. There's no culture that has been set or given to the employees that's already there, why this is important. They're just coming in, and then it is a collision of understanding because maybe for leadership, they're like, well, we hit our quota, just do your job. And they're coming in going, we're here to help make a shift. Well, if somebody's not ready to make a shift and hitting a quota, those are 2 very, very different things. And I have seen it happen, especially when everyone started hiring head of DEI, head of culture. And what are we, 16 months? Most of those positions have left. Most of those colleagues I know have left those positions because the company was not prepared to make a shift. So if you're just checking the box, I always say you check the box, now what? But I also say I will not take a company, even if they have done the work and it's asked me to help hire. And usually I get hired not only to find Black and brown people, but to really find the best person for that position because they know that's the way I'm going to look at it. And I'm going to emphasize Black and brown folks because I'm going to make sure that where Black and brown folks are, that they know this job is even available. And see, that's the difference. It's not about filling with Black and brown folks. Are you putting it in a place where they can see it? And are you doing the work inside? So in order for me to take that, because I'm not an HR recruiter, it's part of what I do for my business. But my agreement says I have to work with leadership and staff in advance of hiring anyone to make sure you are prepared to bring in new cultures into your organization. And if they don't agree to that, then that's hire a recruiter.
Yeah. A sticky question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Where does the responsibility of corporations end? And where does government or other social responsibilities begin when it comes to preparing more people of color for the roles in the market? Because that's something that we need to consider. If we take a cold look at the numbers in education, there's still a massive gap in how much is invested in the education and in the training and the preparedness of many, many different ethnic groups to enter the market. And it feels to me like this is a giant challenge that needs to be overcome. Because if an organization is hiring for a quota, like you said, and they're setting people up by hiring people who are not prepared to do that job, therefore they fail. And then they say, see, we tried, we gave it our best shot, didn't work. But at the same time, nothing is being done to provide more equality in the education system. I heard a podcast a little while ago that talks about the Latino and Black population in the US and how it's going to overtake Caucasians in the next 30 years. And if we consider the amount that's being invested in the education of Black and Brown people, our future does not look very bright, because that will catch up with us. And we will have a population that's not prepared for the roles that society requires in order to function properly. So it was a really long question.
No, I took a few notes because I want to hit something. One is not a sticky question. So I want to go back to two things you said in the answer. It's not that employees are not prepared. Employers are not prepared as well, right? So I want to make sure that that's clear, because I think Black and Brown folks can walk into many roles and still get roadblocks and have much more education than the person sitting next to them, but don't get the opportunities to show that, or invited to the right meetings or to the right outing. So I want that to be very, very clear. Then we're not overtaking, because see, when you say overtake, white folks get very scared. And it's like we're running over and we're taking things from everyone. We're not taking nothing from anybody. We are growing in popularity, which means the opportunities should be the same going across. Doesn't mean anyone's taking. I didn't ask you for your pie. I asked you for a slice of your pie. I always want to make that clear, because people start getting very nervous that we're coming through. We've been here. Okay. With that said, when it comes to education, I want to go back further. I want to go back to that first day that little Black and Brown child walks into school and that teacher decides they're going to call them a different name because they don't want to pronounce their name. I want to go back when that little Black and Brown child goes up a grade and maybe has a bad day and gets labeled as troubled or aggressive that day, that now affects that child going through elementary school, junior high, and high school. I want to talk about the day where that Black and Brown child goes into the guidance counselor and says, oh my God, I love science. And they go, you're not going to ever make it as a scientist. I'm going to talk about the Black and Brown little girl, me, that was trained as a classical ballet dancer at 7. And in 6th grade, that white teacher said to me, and called my parents and said, stop filling her head with fantasies. There's no such thing as a Black ballerina. Luckily, I had the type of parents surrounding and my own personality that never listened to her and danced for kings and queens all over this world. Put that aside, go up again. So the barriers of what these children are being told every step of the way, guidance counselors saying, you can't do that. You're not good enough for that. You don't have the right suit for that. By the time someone gets to college, they're exhausted and they just walked in the door. So therefore, the tutors, the opportunities to, even when someone else may get 5 tutors to get that other test, and they may or may not be able to afford those 5 tutors, that's already a disadvantage. So before you even get to the workplace, you have fought, climbed, dug holes, dug tunnels, gone over mountains, gone through. And let me be very clear, because I don't like this to be confused. Every Black and Brown person does not come from the hood or from a poor neighborhood. There are many, and we all have privilege. There are privileges that go with privilege. So, but the fact of the color of your skin will sometimes determine how you are treated when you walk in that door. Before you ever say anything or look at a resume, or as someone said, someone went to hand their resume and they said, oh, you could not have done all of this.
Oh, God.
And this person had served in the Army, had gone up the ranks, had done college while he was there, and 3 degrees out of the Army. And they said, there's no way you did this. Whose resume is this? So it is not about Black and Brown folks not being prepared. Now, there are portions of it that's not being prepared. We can get in that. It is about the automatic sometimes bias, you call it unconscious, call it is the fact that a lot of people say they want black or brown folks until someone walks in the door. And then they're like, oh, just take Sean, take Johnny, take Johnny, take Johnny. We know Johnny, we know what we're getting. Or they think they know what they're getting.
Right.
The not being prepared is understanding how you play the game of corporate America. And let's all be honest. We can say there's no game and there's no written rule books, right? But there is how you finesse your way through and understand how you do the extra work, how you show up at certain places, how you educate yourself. That is something that is not taught. Why? Because you don't have a lineage of people to see in those positions to help you figure it out. So that was a very long answer. Sorry, but that was a very
it was a very long question.
Took you down the road with me on that one.
No, but you're absolutely right. And I mean, it doesn't change my concern for the investment in education, because I still think that education is the most important thing. But it really does paint a really clear picture that a lot of times either we don't see because we just simply don't want to see it because it's too uncomfortable, or because we've always been so comfortable that we've actually been shielded from finding that out. I grew up in South America, and we love to say that in South America there's no racism. And that's the deepest lie, because it may not be in your face, but it's so intensely rooted in the culture that it never even penetrates into the so-called higher levels of the social pyramid.
But let's be honest,
we are absolutely blind.
But it's because I work with international companies, and so it may not be called racism, but there is colorism. And we all know that certain people of darker skin will not get certain positions. Or have a harder time getting those positions, or have a hard time being compared against when they're in that organization. Because I've had to have those conversations with international companies in Brazil and in Spain. And so it is done differently. Having lived in Europe for 10 and a half years, in Asia for 3.5, I remember someone saying, oh, well, there's same thing. There's no racism here, Leslie. I said, you just told me I wasn't Black. So I'm confused. Because
in Brazil, they'll add an extra layer to it, and they'll call it classicism. And they'll say, oh no, I'm not racist, I'm classicist. And of course they'll overlook the fact that most of the poorer population is of color.
Right.
And in Brazil, there are so many different barriers. I had this conversation with someone the other day. Okay, you'll see Black people on TV. You'll see tons of soccer players, and you'll see dancers, and you'll see actors. When you step into boardrooms, how many Black executives do you see? How many Black doctors do you see? How many Black engineers do you see? And this is not subtracting from the talent of the individuals who do prosper, but when it comes to technical roles that require education from very early on, an investment in education, it's simply not there.
And even when they're there, and it is growing, not enough. When it's there, you still have to prove that you read the same book as the person that's sitting next to you, that you passed the same test to become a doctor as the person next to you, even though you may have passed them the first time, and that other person took the law, the law thing 10 times.
Yeah.
There's always that. And you see it in the news with doctors and nurses that are dealing with people with COVID, and don't touch me. I want a real doctor. Until it's time to incubate, and then all of a sudden they're the best thing since sliced bread. So it's this image of you fit my circle of what I think you should fit. I don't care about your education. I don't care about what you have. If you don't fit my bubble that I'm comfortable with, then you are someone Black or brown that I'm not comfortable with.
Right. It's that idea of I'm not racist as long as you know your place.
Yes. They, them, and those.
You know that one? Yeah.
Leslie, you're good. Oh, can I invite so-and-so? Oh, not them. Well, why not them? Oh, well, you're different. What's that? I push people. What does that different mean? That you're comfortable with me because I can move through anything because that's who I am.
Yeah.
That I'm trying to introduce you to someone that's brilliant that could actually really help your project more than I can because they have that expertise. But that doesn't work for your bubble for the gala that evening of what your table pitching will look like. And so we have to get past that. And so some people say, well, Leslie, why do you still show up? Oh, because I will show up because I will have these conversations. Because it's my responsibility to show up and to be there. I could care less about being the only one in the room. I've been the only one in the country. That is my right because I have decided that's where I belong. And until we also bring that into the culture of Black and brown folks, that we don't need to have an excuse to be in the room. If we are in the room, our presence, our mind, our body, our spirits, our education has the right to be there. And once we're in the room, we need to be a presence within the room, to have a valid voice within the room. And that is not always given to you because you may not always get the opportunity to speak. But I have no problem going, excuse me. Yeah, add on to that because what I have may be added value.
Yeah.
No.
We're so out of time, and I just looked at the clock. For our listeners and our viewers who are watching you right now and are inspired to make change happen in their organization, how do they reach you?
They can always reach me through my website, www.thecavugroup.com, and it's CAVU, and the Cavu is a different construction company, so always make sure the Cavu Group, or they can just reach out directly to me at Leslie at the Cavu Group. And if they want to read a bit more before they reach out to me, my book, Expand Beyond Your Current Culture, is available in bookstores and Amazon and small bookstores as well. So read it and let's have a conversation.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your work and sharing your vision. And I hope to have you again next time, maybe in season 9, to continue along this path of understanding more about how these issues deeply affect culture and in turn, the customer as well. So thank you so much for coming, Leslie.
Thank you. This was an absolute pleasure. It was great speaking with you, Mary.
That's our show. Thanks for joining us. We hope we've brought you one step closer to leading through empathy. It's our way of making the world a better place, one business at a time. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell if you want to know as soon as we publish a new episode. Voices of CX is brought to you by Worthix. I'm Mary Drummond. This podcast is hosted and produced by me, edited and co-produced by Steve Barry. See you next week.